All right. In order to ensure that everyone can clearly hear our presenter and hopefully avoid any technical difficulties, I'll be muting everyone once we get started if I haven't already, but I'll ask you to go ahead and mute yourself by pressing either *# or the mute feature on your phone. Please share any questions and comments you have in the Q&A pod that'll show up here on the next screen in the lower left-hand corner, and we'll help get those fielded as we go along or at the end of the presentation. Again, we'll be sharing the recording, the transcript, and Karen's presentation will also be made available. You can either download that at the end of the webinar today. I'll have that on the last page with the polls in the lower left-hand corner, but we'll also send it out with everything afterwards. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our wonderful presenter today. We have Karen Williams calling in from Trillium Employment Services. She's the executive director there out in Washington. And I had the pleasure of meeting Karen along with a couple other fellow Iowans when we went out to Washington to attend their annual employment summit that's put on by WISE, or the Washington Initiative for Supported Employment. And then Karen was so great to come back to Iowa this past year and be a trainer and leader in our Recruit, Train, Retain leadership series. So we're really happy to have her today, and she's going to do the first in this two-part series on the decentralization of services, or how to build, manage, support, and supervise teams that are working remotely. So I'm going to go ahead and switch screens and hand it over to you, Karen. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Great. Thanks, Jess, for the introduction. Good afternoon, Iowa. I always think that I'm going to get better at doing webinars, but the reality is I'm staring at a screen and you're doing the same, and I'm such a people person that I won't know if you're nodding off or if I'm giving you what you wanted. So I'm going to trust that you're going to be as tech involved as possible and use the Q&A pod at the bottom of your, or for me it's the bottom of the screen, I think for you as well, so that if you have a question or you want me to go further down a road that we were on, or I'm not making sense, or you're falling asleep, that you'll use the chat capacity of this so that we can have the most interactive session as possible, and more importantly, that you get out of this what you're hoping for. So thanks for taking a break from your hard work. I imagine that a lot is still going on for you. As I heard, there was a little delay in the MCOs sort of fully getting launched, and I don't know if that just creates more anxiety or just adds to the top 10 list of how MCOs are making your work harder. But hopefully things are turning in the right direction for you guys. And I know, just so you know, we're all watching across the country because it may be inevitable for all of us. It was fun for me to see a bunch of your names that I recognized, whether I met you at the Iowa AFSCME conference or the Recruit, Train, and Retain, which I call my Iowa summer camp experience. Anyway, hope you're all doing well. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm just going to give a little context. I work for a nonprofit in Washington State. We work in 4 counties around the Seattle area. Some are rural, some are suburban, and some have urban centers as well. We serve about 500 people, about 50 staff, and about 70% of the people we support are working in individual employment. So for us, supported employment is individual employment in the community. And since 1983, when we started, we've always done individual employment. So I want to be really clear that I have never had the experience of transitioning an organization from sheltered or facility-based into community-based. And so for those of you who are doing that, I'm not only are you doing great work, I'm not your best ally in resources, but there are definitely lots of great organizations and colleagues of mine here in Washington State who have done it. And so just to be clear about the decentralization process, I'm not really the best person on the decentralizing transition, but what I'm going to focus on today is those of you who are building teams that work remotely in the community, or you are transitioning new roles, or even if you have an established team and you're just thinking about new ways. Hopefully I'll have something for you in this series that is helpful. Okay, so I'm going to start with when I was thinking about creating this. As you see from my title, I call it free-range teams, and the reality is that the work of supported employment out in the community, there is a lot of time out in the field, which is a good thing. For me, what I say is that about 70% of staff time should be out in the community. But that can also create a lot of anxiety for managers as well as the staff who are out there in the field and not always sure what to do. If you think about the difference between when you're in your little pen and you know exactly where to do, you know how much water you're going to get for the day, how much food you're going to get, what time of day you're going to get it. It's very different than when someone sends you out into the field and says, forage for yourself and come back when it's dark. So the thing is that we want to be out in the community. That's where our work happens. That's where businesses are. That's where our civic leaders and allies are who will get us connected to more businesses. So we want our staff to be out in the community. And yet it creates a lot of anxiety. So as I was thinking about this, I was realizing that what can happen, and the disconnect that can happen sometimes, is there is an idea of what should be happening out in the field, and then there's the reality of what does happen out there. And since we can't control all of our staff being free agents out in the field, the best we can do is make sure that our expectations align with what they are doing out there, and to result in both the best outcome for our clients and also retention of staff. And they play together pretty well. So as I was working through and meeting with some of my managers to figure out, you know, hey, what are some of the key things that come up for us in managing our teams? And just to give some context, each of our managers manages about 10 employment consultants that all work out in the field. And our employment consultants do both job coaching and job development. And I know that that's a very different structure from what a lot of agencies do. And I'm happy to, you know, offline answer any questions about that. But they're responsible for all aspects of supporting an individual and finding the businesses and supporting the businesses. So I was talking to the managers about this webinar, and we kind of brainstormed, you know, what some of the key things were. And categorically, I came up with these three core pieces. One is establishing clear expectations with staff. Two, having reliable communication between staff and with managers. And three, making sure that there's shared time out in the field. So we're going to walk through each of these pieces. Okay, so you can see I stuck with the chicken theme here with the weekly and monthly egg laying charts. So for clear expectations, it's more than a book of rules or do's and don'ts about doing this work. It's really about vision, accountability, and standards, and creating clear expectations so that when staff are out in the field, they know what they're responsible for, they know what decisions they can make on their own, and they know what they're supposed to bring back to the team. So digging into these a little bit more deeply about the clear expectations. So I'm in the middle of doing a new staff orientation, and one of the things that I talk about with them is the vision and values of our organization. And we all work for organizations that, you know, have taglines and mission statements that are, you know, probably on a wall or on a pen or somewhere nearby. And while that's helpful, it's not necessarily enough to give a clear expectation and a deep, rich values understanding by all staff, and making sure that the leadership is engaged with staff on what the vision is for what we're doing. So I like to use this video that Simon Sinek did at the TED Talk he did, and he talks about starting with why. And really what it is we know how to talk about what we do and how we do it. What we do is we find jobs for people. We connect businesses with employees with disabilities. We strengthen the workforce. That's what we do. How we do it, we use our assessments, we use job analysis, we use informational interviews, we job develop, etc. But why we do what we do, that conversation doesn't happen a lot. And I think it's so important when you're sending staff out into the field, they know that we have common language about why we do what we do. And, it could be that we're building a stronger community. We're making sure that all students with disabilities are entering the job market. Those are the visions that we have for our communities and the work we do. So one activity that we do with our new hires is we watch this video and then we sit around with that group and we talk about why we do what we do. And it's kind of a way to, even if you've had staff on your team for a long time or you're starting with a new team, it's a way to build that cohesion and making sure you have a common vision. And then as leadership, and as staff, as you go through your work and your days, you're continuing to refer back to that vision. So when you hit a hard patch or when you are in a moment of uncertainty or staff transition, getting rooted back in the vision of what you're doing. And this may sound really loosey-goosey and kind of hokey, but there is value in making sure there's alignment between what leadership wants and what staff want. And, staff often have really great vision because they're the ones doing the work and seeing what the impact is in the community. And so making sure it's a two-way conversation and everyone has input into creating that vision. The second piece is goals. And if any of you have done a webinar with me before or been in training, I'm really big on goals. People need to know what they're doing. They need to know what the expectations are. And without goals that are present and in front of us, that we can lose a lot of clarity on what the expectations are. So it's really important that staff who are out in the field know if they have certain expectations around the number of direct service hours they should be providing, the number of jobs they should be finding, the amount of time they should be in the community versus in the office. Whatever the metrics you want to use or the different categories, making sure that everyone knows it. I guarantee that each of you has a finance manager who knows how many billable hours you should have or how much DVR income you need. But do staff understand how they contribute to that? And that's really what this is about. If we set goals, then we all know what our share of the contribution is, right? So that when we're out lonely in the field doing our work, we know what piece of the pie we're responsible for. So I think it's really important to take some time to make sure that staff are clear on those expectations for their contribution. For example, for us, if you take an average working month is 173 hours, then we expect staff to do about 120 direct service hours. That means that in that time, that's, whether they're coaching, developing, billable time on behalf of a client, or they're doing DVR, which is outcome-based for us. But 120 hours of their month should be direct service on behalf of a client. The remaining time is office time, staff training time, water cooler time, as I call it. But that they have a sense of what that expectation is, so that if they don't know, is this enough? Did I do enough? Did I put in enough time? They have a sense of what that is. We also are really focused on our goals. So we have goals around job placement. We have goals around clients who want to increase the hours that they're working. We call those career advancement goals. We have goals around students graduating. We have goals around retention. So the jobs, we track them for the first year of the placement, and we track what % of jobs last at least a year. So that's our retention rate, and we can use that to obviously pitch to employers about how good the retention is. Anyway, that kind of gives you an idea of some of the things that we track. And since staff know that's being tracked, they have a sense of what their contribution is towards those goals. So they each might have their own individual goals for job placement. I'm going to place 2 of my clients in the next 6 months. They know what their goals are. They know what's expected of them in terms of contributing to the overall organizational goals. So make sure you have some kind of goal set up, whether it's on service hours or outcomes or something, and that staff and leadership are all talking about them the same. And you're reporting out on the progress. How are people doing? Do they know? Do they know how to switch it up if they're not meeting those hours? For example, we had one of our teams that was spending a lot of time with the students trying to get them their jobs, but what happened was that the rest of the clients got sacrificed, and so it was a matter of looking at their time, that they reported out, and we have a database to track their case notes and log their hours, and looking at it and say, look at what percentage of your time is going to the students versus everyone else, and so how do we shift that a little bit? And it was just helpful to be able to have the data from the case notes where they log their hours to be able to then realign and make sure we were going for the same goal. We had a better balance of the time allocation. But all of that is because we had articulated a goal in the first place, and so they knew the expectations. All right, the third piece on this page is about time management and accountability. And boy, this is a tricky one, right? Any of you who remember starting this work, if you did the direct service or if you manage it, know that probably one of the hardest things about working out in the field in supported employment is it's not the kind of job where you clock in and out and someone tells you what to do all day. You have to figure out how to schedule your week, what appointments to set. You're creating those appointments. You're balancing that emergency phone call from an employer saying, if you don't get over here, Sally's getting fired. At the same time, you've got a family calling saying, how come Jim doesn't have a job yet? And it's a lot of moving parts, and it's not as easy as just showing up and someone telling you what to do. So when it comes to supporting staff who are out there figuring out how to do this, whether they're brand new or they've been doing it for a while, there is a lot around time management that's really important. And part of that is building in accountability, because guess what? You can't follow each of those chickens out into the field and know what they're doing. So you have to build in structures for accountability. So with time management, some of the tools that we set up for staff is helping them, again, use the goals that they have, whether it's, let's start with service hours for a client. So if they have 10 clients that have a certain number of service hours allocated to them, they have a way to track that. So when they're planning their week, they can know, 6 hours for Jim, 12 hours for Susan, et cetera. But they can use that to sort of shape up their calendar for the week. Also, giving them tools about geographic planning, right? So if you have someone at one end of town and another client at the other end of town, giving them some sense of how it's better for time management and mileage to have them schedule those two meetings together whenever they can, or at least on the same day, and then spend the rest of the day maybe job developing in those communities. But a lot of staff, it might seem obvious, of course, that you're going to, try to have two meetings close together, but it doesn't always work. So try to reinforce that they do their planning of their week with geographic proximity in mind. And then the other thing is learning how to reprioritize when you're out in the field. So what we find early on is when the staff is starting, they call home every 5 minutes, right? Because they don't know, a situation happens in the field and they don't know how to respond, and so they call home, meaning they call their manager or they call their coworker for every single decision. And so one of the things that we do early on is in those phone calls say, well, how would you do it? What are you thinking would be a good plan with this? And what you're doing there is you're giving staff their own tools to manage their time and manage how they might reprioritize a day. So it could go like this. They have a perfectly planned out day where they're going to go see 4 clients. They're going to do some job coaching, maybe stop in to see a business, do a follow-up call. Whatever it is, it's a perfectly planned day. all of a sudden they're driving down the road and they get a call from an employer who says, you better get in here, you know, Sam's won't leave the break room and you know, he needs to get back to work and we can't help him. So all of a sudden they've got to turn around and go across town, but they're also nervous because they have this really important interview with another client coming this afternoon. This happens all the time, and maybe it's not always this big of a deal. Sometimes it's easier to juggle. But we want them to be able to make a decision in the moment of how to handle it, because otherwise they're just going to be calling home for every big and little thing. So they get to that situation, they call their manager. It's really important for the manager to then talk it through. Okay, could someone else cover you for the client who won't leave the break room? Is there someone else who knows the business or the person interviewing so they could go with them? You know, what are the other resources? Could you schedule that interview a little farther out? Just having different conversations. And the reality is there is no cookie cutter way to do this job. So part of that time management and managing themselves is figuring out how to make those decisions in a day. Also, just to save a little bit of managers' time not to have to field every one of those questions, building that in that staff, that there's an expectation that staff can manage it on their own. Okay, and then another piece of time management is have staff learn from each other. There is no one organizational tool that works for everybody. Hopefully your staff around the field have access to a laptop and an Outlook calendar to keep things organized. But there's millions of checklists and apps and different forms that people use to help themselves stay organized and keep track of those client hours, to keep track of their mileage effectively, to log their case notes in a timely manner so they're accurate. And I find that the most organized person on your team is not the best person to teach your least organized person, because they have completely different brains that work in completely different ways. And so it's really, sometimes they're oppositional, but it's really, you know, that the least organized person needs to kind of find a middle ground person to get some tools and strategies from. But I would say organization is so important in this job, and it's not something that comes naturally to a lot of us. But there are, and there's no one way to do it. So make sure that staff are taking the time to figure out their systems, and if the system's not working, call them out on it and say, hey, listen, I know you tried that app on your phone to track your mileage. It's not working, so figure something else out, you know, and really put the responsibility on the staff that they need to manage this time, and they need to manage all these, you know, the expectations that have been set out there. So, and then the last piece, and I'm not going to go too far into this because I believe it's going to be the next series that Gina from ProVail is going to talk about, some of the tools that are used. But, you know, the databases you use to log case notes, checklists that your organization might have for job starts or other steps that staff need to take. These are all really helpful, and it's part of keeping people in check, but also giving them tools to self-manage. Okay, a little bit about accountability. We talk a lot about accountability because we want to put it out there that, hey, you are basically free-range chicken for about 70% of your time, meaning no one's watching over your shoulder. So our expectation is that you're going to be accountable. We trust you, right? We hired you because we trust you. And so you are accountable to your clients, you are accountable to your teammates, you're accountable to our funders who are paying for this service, and you're accountable to the employers and the broader community who's watching you while you're out there. And oftentimes in these conversations, this is a good time to return to the vision statement that you came up with and return to the why. Why are we doing this? And why does accountability matter? And those are the kind of conversations that just need to happen every once in a while. And it's not because somebody, you know, stopped at Target on their way in between coaching clients. It's because they were kind of, you know, slipping a little bit or not doing their case notes well. There are lots of ways that accountability shows up. But it's just something to refresh and keep in mind and have it be a conversation that people really know what accountability means and how they contribute to the overall accountability of this work. All right. So far we're about halfway through and I haven't had any questions yet. How are you guys doing? Chat away. Send me a signal. Is everyone sleeping? Anyone still awake? I'm going to show you just a quick few little tools here. This is one that we use for new staff. Employment consultants use this in the early times. And what you're seeing here is, they can track their caseload at the top, number of people served, and then they report out on their direct service hours, which they can find by doing a search in our case note database. And what this is really for is to show them that in the beginning, you're going to have a lot more office time or training time, but proportionately over time, your direct service hours will increase and your office time or training time will decrease. But and then this is just helpful because you might have different categories. We broke it into job development, coaching, intake. But other people might, your organization might have different categories, based on your funding and everything. But really what it is it shows people that they can manage their own time, and it sets the expectation early on that they can manage it, and gives them some structure for how to manage it and how to see what's going on, right? They need to know, where is my time going? Where should it be different? And this is the kind of tool that you can use to have a conversation with them. Similarly, at the bottom, they can list employers that they're contacting and then their follow-up activities so that you're having conversations that you're expecting them to, have a new goal, have a new follow-up activity, that kind of thing. So we use this when new staff meet with program managers, but you can use it with existing staff if you're just for the first time focusing on how they allocate their time or if time looks different now in a new role for them. This is a similar tool that we use for new staff. This job in collaboration and record keeping pieces. So for each of those categories, in a month they'll report out, this month I learned such and such new thing, and this is how I'm integrating it into my daily work, and then I have a question about this. And so with these three pieces, they're able to kind of take ownership of what they're learning, and it's guiding them to know that we're expecting them to be developing skills in each of these areas of job development, communication, job coaching, et cetera. So these are just the kind of tools that we use to help with accountability, goal setting, and time management, all related to the common vision. Happy to share any of these. If you want to email me, I can send those along to you. Okay, so now we talked about clear expectations. Now we're talking about reliable communication. So the reality is it can be super lonely and overwhelming out there in the field. And, you're making a lot of decisions. You have a lot of responsibility. You're figuring it out for yourself. You get knocked down a lot, whether it's an employer that just won't ever say yes or a coworker at a job site that just is kind of grumpy and not helping your client be more successful. It can be lonely, and you're driving all around town, and, your car's getting dirtier and dirtier by the day as you eat your lunch in it. So we as leadership need to make sure that our peeps have a place to come together. They know where home is, and they know that home is a place where they can get support and they can get celebrated. So I'm going to talk through a few of the ways that we do this. Okay, it's pretty core to have weekly team meetings. We were kind of loose about it for a while, and we just saw teams unravel. They're already out there spread so thin and kind of running around, no pun intended, like chickens with their heads cut off. But they can at times feel very chaotic. And so having a regularly scheduled and consistent team meeting has helped. So even if not all staff can be there, just keep it at the same time all the time so that people know it's there. For staff, a team meeting can provide that home base. It can be a place for them to share successes, and it can be a place for them to help get support with challenges they might be having with a client or an employer. For a manager, it's an opportunity for them to be able to touch base with their entire team or their staff. It's a way for them to celebrate the accomplishments of their staff. The little things are important to celebrate as much as the job placements. And it's an opportunity to have shared learning among staff, right, because they're talking about stories. So We find it helpful to have a standing agenda template. So you might have things like you start out with recognitions, you have time to talk about job starts, job development, some administrative stuff, but you have that standing agenda item template, and then you allow each different team member to facilitate the meeting using that template. And what that does is it allows people to have a leadership opportunity and to contribute to the flavor of that team. So if someone's an introvert and they don't typically, pipe up in a team meeting, if they're leading the meeting, it's their way to contribute. If you have someone who thinks unless there's, a funny joke in every 5 minutes and they're falling asleep at a team meeting, well, they'll have a chance to add their own flair to the meeting. It also lets the manager take a step back and watch how their team interacts together. And, our staff are learning a lot of really cool leadership skills while they're out in the community doing this work. So it's nice to give them a chance to show it back at the office. So however you do your team meeting, we just find it to be really helpful to have a consistent, a weekly meeting. And then with new staff, we do meet more frequently one-on-one, but with a team, even if your team is 2 or 3 people, making sure there's time that all of you get together. Another thing that we find helpful is to have a mentor for new staff. And I know some of you are building teams and you only have an army of 1 at this point, but by mentoring new staff, what you're doing is you're creating a safe place for them to get some learning. They're shadowing out in the field. They're watching how it's done, and so there's a transfer of knowledge and experience, and they're building at the same time those time management skills, the expectation, you're passing on the vision, and it's hard to do that out in the field, to try to set up 2 staff to just go out there and do their own thing. And so with mentoring, you're saying, hey, for the next few months, we're going to have as much of our time paired together with a senior staff and a new staff. It also helps because it takes some of the training time off a manager. So if you have a lot of new staff starting at once, it can be really hard on a manager to effectively train each of those staff because they all learn in different ways and they come with different levels of experience. And so by pairing people up, it's not that they're the only person they learn from, but they just have kind of a safe place to go. So we use mentoring as one way to bring on board new staff. Okay, so self-reporting tests. I know this sounds like a clinical program, but this job is largely about self-reporting, right? So I go out all day and I'm coaching, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and I'm entering my case notes and reporting on what I'm doing. Someone's not necessarily watching me to validate those. And so part of communication and having reliable communication is for staff to understand that case notes and pretty much anything they do out in the field is really a two-way communication piece. So our managers they just do a scan of case notes, and I don't know if you all have a database where people log their hours and their case notes, but I'm kind of assuming you probably do or you're building that. Anyway, managers build into their responsibilities that they'll scan those case notes once or twice a week, and it's proven to be really powerful. One thing is they get to see things that maybe staff wouldn't have reported on their own, and so it's a really cool way to be able to see the unique and creative things staff are doing out in the field. It might also be an opportunity to find out, to see if someone's stuck, if they're reporting that, Sally still doesn't get off the bus, Sally still doesn't get off the bus week after week, and you're seeing this, it's like, okay, this staff person needs some intervention, otherwise we're not making any progress for this client, and maybe the staff wouldn't have otherwise asked for help. So I would build in a little bit of a responsibility on managers to browse through those case notes. Also, we found that it helps. I don't know how much you guys deal with coding errors, but a lot of times our staff will miscode, whether it's the wrong client or the wrong code for billing. And so it's a good way to just catch those more frequently and do training around it. So really that is about communication in a two-way street. And then the last piece about reliable communication is it's really important for staff to know that there's going to be celebrations and there's going to be feedback. With celebrations, I think we have it as a standing agenda item on team meetings, whether it's kudos or recognitions. It's a way for staff to recognize something. Maybe, my coworker came and helped me in a job coaching situation where I was really stuck. I couldn't figure out how to fade from somebody, or they covered for me while, I had to call in sick because my daughter was sick. Whatever it is, there's recognitions and you're celebrating each other's contributions. And then with feedback, I'm sure each of your organizations gets feedback in different ways. It might be that you get customer surveys on their satisfaction. We do a postcard to new employers after 90 days and ask them some questions, and we get feedback from them. We do staff evaluations, and then for new staff at 4 months, we call a sample of families and employers and ask how the new staff is doing. So these are all ways that we're getting feedback on our services, and sometimes in particular on a particular staff person. And it's really important to share that feedback with the staff person. A lot of times it's really great feedback, and so it's really wonderful. And sometimes it could be that we got an employer wrote back and said, they didn't hear from us as much as they wanted. Okay, well, that's really important feedback for that staff to know. So a lot of what's helpful with feedback is it's an opportunity to, again, go back to what are the standards and expectations of this work, and let's assume that we're always learning and we're always growing, and we all have areas that we can develop. And the feedback is just to make us stronger and more effective for our clients, and more effective in creating the change we want to see in the community. So build those in as routine communication with your staff, and figuring out ways to do that, because they're always out there in the field doing lots of things you don't know. There are different ways for you to gather feedback on them. If you don't have any of these customer service type of surveys, I'm happy to give a couple ideas offline and talk with you about some that you could build in for yourself to get those started. Or if you're collecting them, then maybe you could start using them and directly showing staff the feedback. Okay, so the last piece is about shared field time. So we've talked about clear expectations, reliable communication, and now we're talking about shared field time. So if you have given staff the right expectations and they know and they have tools to be successful, then you can let go of the leash. They will be fine. You hired them because you wanted them to do this job well. So part of what needs to happen is a little bit of letting go. And most of what happens in this job that's really successful is because of collaboration, whether it's among your teammates or with people, at a job site, and there's a lot of creativity. And so there needs to be enough wiggle room to be able to experiment and take some risks, and you want to be out there a little bit to see it. So a couple of ways that we work on shared field time. The first thing is managers have to get away from behind their computer. We found that when we asked staff what they want more of, often we heard that they wanted more time out in the field with their managers. And we were surprised because, of course, we always thought, oh, gosh, they're going to think we're hovering over them with a clipboard, evaluating them and checking off what they're doing wrong. But in reality, staff, again, they're lonely and they want to show off their work, and they want feedback. They want to know how they're doing. So we implemented something that managers now go to a job site within the first 2 weeks of a new job. So if there's a job placement, within the first 2 weeks of that job, a manager goes out to see it. And this does a number of things. One is it sends a celebratory message to the staff because they're going to have their manager come out and see this cool job they developed. It sends a really great message to the business, hey, this is a piece of our quality assurance and customer service that our manager comes in to see the job and meet with the employer. And then 3, it's an opportunity for fresh eyes on the job site. And I'll talk a little bit more about fresh eyes, but what we found is we started having a lot of job starts that were not successful, so there were job losses, within a month or two. And sometimes what happens is, staff were so excited about a job, they kind of rushed through a few things, or they built themselves into a job to make sure it was successful. So sometimes having fresh eyes, including a manager out there, could help retract some of those things that were maybe going down a bad pathway. So it's really great to have that input from managers. So managers need to make time to get out into the field and see jobs. So even if you don't have a job, start saying, I'm committed to seeing 10% of our jobs, or going job developing with my staff, or whatever it is. Make a commitment that managers are out there in the field. The other way to have shared field time is we find it really helpful when people can collaborate. So I might see something in a job where, and so say someone's working, I might think that I trained them the right way, but yet I find I can't fade, or I can't teach them this new task. It could simply be that I am just, this is how my brain is hardwired, and I can't see it another way. So I might invite a coworker in to see that job, and they might say, well, heck, Karen, you've got this woman sitting down. If she was standing up, she'd be able to, move these pieces this way, or she's left-handed, so flip that around and have her start with her left, on the left side, move to the right. Whatever it is, sometimes it's just having the fresh eyes on that situation that really can open up an opportunity, whether it's to teach someone a new task, to have them be more independent. When you're job developing, maybe you connect with an employer in a way that I don't. And so we find that allowing staff to have some time to collaborate is really important. When I talk about this, I usually get some questions about how we bill for it. So I'm surprised there's no one piping in on that, but I'll just briefly touch on it, and if you have more questions, I can answer. But what we talk about with staff is, if you were both in a situation where you're both there and you want to know how to bill your time, answer the question, if you can discreetly demonstrate the value add that your time was for the client, then it's legitimately billable. If you were really there to train a staff or help a staff, then it's not billable to the client. But for example, if I had someone come in and I'm still really hands-on job coaching them, and I had a coworker come in to take video or pictures to build a task board, then those are two discretely distinct activities on behalf that benefit the client, and could happen at totally different times, right? So that's how you know that you can bill for it. I'll let you battle that out with your own funders. They may see it differently. But it might also just be in your best business interest to allow some amount of collaboration out there, even if it's not billable time. The other piece around shared field time is that since there are no recipes and there are lots of decisions that need to be made in this job, staff need support, and they also need support to take risks and to make some mistakes. They need to be able to experiment with things, and sometimes that happens when you can go out and see a job site, or go out and see how a client they have interacts in the community, so that you can say, yeah, you know what, I know you've tried A, B, and C. I met Susan, and I can see where you're feeling stuck right now. Go ahead, try option D. I don't know if it'll work either, but give them a little bit of space. And sometimes you're more likely to give them that room if you've met the person, or you've seen how that person is interfacing at their work or in the community, wherever they are in their pathway to employment. So making sure that they have support and that they're empowered to make decisions. And the last thing is, about shared field time, is we all learn from each other, and we all have different strengths. So you might have two staff that are both really great job developers, but they develop in different ways, and they can learn from each other. You might have two really good job coaches, but they have different styles. So as much as possible, having them share their stories, whether it's in team meetings or they have opportunities to do it out in the field, it's really important. So if you can't get them together out in the field, have them bring the field into the team meeting and share those stories. We find even if your jobs are distinct, that there's a job coach and then there's a job developer, there are times when a job coach needs a developer, right? They could be coaching a job that's falling apart, or now certain tasks that someone's been doing for 5 years, the business no longer has that job anymore. And so they need someone to come in and do some internal job development. Well, it would be really great if your job developer could feed some tips to the job coach who already has a relationship with the business. And vice versa, you know, a job developer might think there's a really good job, but they don't have an eye for task analysis or how they would break down a job task when they're trying to figure out the fit of who would be the right job match. And so they could play off of each other a lot. And part of it is building that trust, that they trust the other person enough to come into their space, right, to come into their job coaching site or to be a consultant to an employer. So it's in our collective best interest to have them do shared learning so that they can leverage the strengths from each other and learn from each other. And so as a leader, I always like to put situations out there and ask certain people to pair up on a project. And you can sort of do it in a choreographed way like that, and then eventually over time it happens more organically, and it's pretty cool. Okay, so I'm getting near the end here, and I just wanted to offer a couple of things. So if you've never managed a team of people out in the field or you've been doing it for a while, it's really easy for us to get caught up in our control and getting nervous. Even if you're a coworker who is part of a team and you're about to hire someone new, sometimes you don't want to let them go. You don't want that new person out there because you're worried that they're going to mess up your reputation or do the wrong thing. So the first thing I think about is letting go a little bit, making sure that you give them the tools and the expectations up front so they know they have the vision, they have the clear expectations, they have the tools they need, and then let them do a little bit of learning and exploring on their own. So you hired them for a reason and trust that. The second thing is there's going to be poop, right? These birds are everywhere, and there's going to be little things that happen that we have to deal with. And part of the job, right? I mean, it happens from our employers and our clients. It happens from our staff. And, you know, it's just nature of the work. And so have some levity with it. And then the last thing is good things happen and hatch out of happy chickens. So a lot of what we're talking about with free-range teams is that you're building competencies and skills in staff, and you're also teaching them to manage themselves and manage their own professional development. And if they feel supported out there and they feel recognized and celebrated for their contributions, then they're going to be happy and they're going to stick around and they're going to produce great outcomes for you. So it's a really good balance to think about how are we creating staff that are happy in this work and get good outcomes, and what is our contribution, whether it's as managers or as coworkers, to making sure that people have that. And that's the last of my piece. I am grateful to have had this time with you guys, and it was really helpful for me to think through some of the things that we're doing to help our staff, and also you know, whenever I do a session like this, it makes me think, well, maybe we need to look at that and try it a little different way, or maybe we've kind of slipped a little bit off that. So we definitely are always looking for ways to tweak things and grow. Like I said, most recently we started this thing where managers are now going out in the field for job starts, and I've just heard so many positive things from managers, how at first they were nervous, like how are we going to have time for this? But now they glow when they talk about what they see from their staff and how cool it was to interact with the business, and for God's sakes, they got themselves out of the office, you know. So it was really great. And so I encourage, if there are opportunities for managers to figure out any little thing they can shift off their plate or delegate to a staff for a leadership opportunity, to get out there in the field and be there alongside in the trenches. It's really rewarding. And a last plug is if you haven't created a Bitmoji, then you too can have one of these images that is a cartoon version of you saying thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Looks like we have a couple folks typing in possibly some questions or comments, so we'll give it a minute here to see what pops up. I see Candeo and Ed are maybe typing in some stuff, so we'll see what pops up. We'll give it just a second here.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Part of the problem is too, I've muted the folks on the phone, so I'll work on unmuting some folks here in case they just want to speak up here since we're at the end.
Okay, so
there we go.
Yeah, I see Ed. So Ed typed in and said, sometimes the smallest things you do make the biggest difference. Ed, yeah, for sure. You know, sometimes when I'm talking about these things and I say it's so important to, you know, take 5 minutes to do recognitions around the table for a team meeting, people think like, well, that's not going to help me get job placements. You know, and it's like, okay, there's not an immediate direct correlation, but the little things add up to give staff recognition and boost them up. They do hard work, and they need that support. So these little things, like you said, Ed, you kind of have to experiment. Not everyone wants to do recognitions. Maybe you switch it up in a different way, different format, but creating those little changes definitely helps. Okay, Sierra, how do different employment teams create and maintain relationships with each other? What are some examples of team building activities that you do? So we actually let teams come up with their own team building activities. We've had some teams come up with, one of them, they just went and volunteered. Another one found this program where you have to figure out, it's like a puzzle. I wasn't there, but basically you're given all these clues when you first walk in, and you have to figure out how to get yourself out of this box as a team. So there's a series of clues, and I think only like 12% of teams get out of it. But magically, our team did. One of our teams did. Another team didn't. So that's a long-term rivalry going there. But we let teams come up with what seems like a team-building activity that suits them. We have another team that will do an activity, like they'll go play like flag football in a park somewhere. But another team that wouldn't work for, because the physical nature of it just wouldn't be inclusive enough for everybody on that team. And so part of building up the teams is letting the team, not the leader, but the team come up with the idea of what to do. And the leader just makes the space for that and reinforces the importance of it. And we just started doing this thing too where whenever we do any kind of team building activity, whether it's, you know, a 20-minute icebreaker at a team meeting or, you know, a full 2-hour afternoon kind of thing, is we always do a reflection. And that builds in sort of this habit of reflecting. And so at our last team meeting, we made these little laminated cards that can fit into our wallets or work bags. And the first question is, what did I notice about myself? So whether you're playing flag football or you just did some goofy icebreaker at a team meeting, you know, what did I notice about myself? And how did I contribute to that? And so those are two ways that then you can take that out into the workplace. You know, what did I notice about myself when I was coaching, and what did I contribute to that coaching experience? You know, so it becomes a habit, not just in a team building moment, but outside to their work. And trust me, you can spend all day Googling team building exercises that are cost-free that you can do in your conference room. All right, so David, I love the free range concept. You discussed the importance of developing skills in communication, coaching, case notes, business development. In your experience, is there one area that does not get the training priority it should? Well, I would say that the soft skills are really hard. They take a lot. It's not a one-hit wonder. You can pretty much do, say, business development or job coaching with systematic instruction. You can do those in one-day trainings and get a lot of bang for your buck out of that. I think the things like communication, organizational skills, case notes, those take ongoing support and curriculum. So it's not just like I sent you to a communication training, why aren't you a better communicator? But what are we doing as a team to communicate better? What is the relationship between managers and staff around communication? And so it takes ongoing support, and they evolve.